Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dreams and Conversations. This is our first edition. This is our Regen-era Edition, and I'm really excited to be here today with Liz Taggart. So before we dive into today's conversation, I just want to tell you a little bit about Liz, who I feel really privileged to say is a friend, and dare I say, mentor too, because she's pretty fantastic. So I just want to let you know that Liz here has been teaching courses in writing and Vedic literature in a university setting for over 20 years. She's a certified teacher of transcendental meditation. She holds a BS in consciousness through Meru, which is the Maharishi European Research University, and an MA in literature and writing through Georgetown University. Liz has been involved with the Sarah Lawrence Writers Institute from 2014 to 2020. Now, Liz also is a businesswoman, and she has co-owned the Hollis Taggart Galleries in New York City for more than 2 decades. She has helped create the fine art exhibitions and catalogs that were noted by scholars and museums for their historical contributions. She has also owned and operated an award-winning Vedic organic farm, Amba Farms, in Westchester County, New York. Liz made a name for herself through Amba and was widely recognized for her work in regenerative and nutrient-dense growing practices. Liz has been featured in books. She has appeared on the Martha Stewart Show. It goes on and on and on. So with that, thank you, Liz, for being here today.
Oh, Mariette, I'm so privileged to be here, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Well, speaking of fun,
Yeah.
speaking of fun, Liz, as I mentioned, has been a longtime student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and was in the room and all about back when Buckminster Fuller and Maharishi had occasion to meet. Now, from my understanding, they met more than once in a series of what Maharishi would call symposiums, where he invited the best thinkers and leaders of the time to come and meet with him. So it would have been in the 1970s, early 1970s, when they started to meet and discuss various strains of unified knowledge. So is that correct, Liz?
Yes, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Great. And so you were there once or twice. Can you tell me a little bit about the experience of the symposiums in general, and then also maybe a little bit about meeting Bucky?
Well, I didn't meet him personally. It was more, we were all these starry-eyed teenagers in the early 70s there. And coming from a variety of different backgrounds, I'm from Southeast Cleveland, a little town called Maple Heights, where it was an immigrant community. And although I grew up in a very modest blue-collar family, my thoughts and dreams were that of something greater, something more in this world exists. But I was always tampered with, well, what's practical and how do you make a living? But then when I learned more about Maharishi, as so many thousands of us did at that time, and started to practice meditation and understand this profound integrated knowledge from the East, we were thrilled to be able to attend some of these symposium. I think they were held both in the US and then also some in Europe. And we were starstruck by so many speakers. But one thing that really stood out with Buckminster Fuller was he had a lot of empathy and compassion and love for humanity. And a lot of the speakers, they had brilliant vision into different sciences, but we didn't necessarily see this kind of deep interest in what's the greater good for humankind. And I think that's what really stood out. And Maharishi responded in kind to Buckminster Fuller in that way. So there was a great love that was exchanged between the two of them.
So one of the things about this exchange and this, what might have, eventually, what kind of brought them together is, I'm curious, at that time, 1969 around is when Buckminster Fuller published Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And so this would have been the synthesis of a lot of his work, a synthesis of a lot of the work that he had been doing since he had really decided to make his life dedicated to making all of his inventions, all of his work in support of livingry, what he called, instead of working with weaponry, which he felt society was based on weaponry, moving it toward livingry, right? And making the world work for 100% of the people. I believe that there's this amazing sort of weaving between their work, because Maharishi also had launched the spiritual regeneration movement, right?
He
And
sure did, yes.
could you tell me a little bit about that? Because that, just even that word regeneration, we use it so much right now.
I'd be happy to. Maharishi's teacher, Maharishi comes from this great lineage of Vedic masters that is traced for thousands of years. And the most recent custodian of that was his divinity, Brahmananda Saraswati, Maharishi's teacher or master, it's called in that tradition. And he was the Shankaracharya of Jyotirmath in the north during the 40s and 50s, I believe. And towards the end of his years, he asked Maharishi to take the simple technology of transcendental meditation out into the world to help strengthen the thinking and well-being of humanity. Thinking is the basis of all of our activity, and he felt like humanity needed a regeneration of their wholeness, their within themselves. And that's the term that Maharishi coined, was spiritual, but he always described spiritual as wholeness more than the sum of its parts. So that spiritual regeneration was a movement that would help individuals tap into their own inner ocean of silent consciousness and being. We're human beings, not human doings. And by a daily practice of that, regenerate their own life force and integrity and intelligence and faculties. And so he resonated so much with Buckminster Fuller, as Buckminster Fuller talked about how every individual has these nascent, latent faculties that needed to be cultured and developed. They were both on the same page with that, maybe different languaging, but the same page.
Mm. That that is really beautiful, and it brings me to this idea of language, right? So sometimes language makes things easier to understand, and sometimes it hides. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the language of regeneration, and even, is there, in this spiritual sense that Maharishi spoke about, we now use it in agriculture, and can you find a way that we could weave those ideas together somehow in your own work? I feel like you already have, but if you want to share with us.
Well, let's have a conversation about it, Mariette, and we'll have some back and forth here. Maharishi explained it to us. I had the good fortune to spend many years studying with him and really delving deep into these Vedic principles. One term, for example, he would sometimes be frustrated and he would say English is such a homely language, that there were so many facets of subtleties within human capacity that English hadn't named yet. Whereas Sanskrit and the Vedas have elaborated in deep dialogue about. One of those phrases is the Sanskrit term pasha. Pasha, pasha, pasha. It's a term that Maharishi shared with us that his teacher, Gurudev, which was the affectionate nickname for his teacher, he would say to his students, pasha, and that means to see. But the type of seeing it is the inner vision. Maybe what you are exploring as dreamscapes, what Buckminster Fuller would tap into his own inner vision to understand how different laws of nature functioned. Maharishi talked about how that capacity to see our inner being and to be that inner being, that's what regenerated us. He said it was an ocean of unbounded intelligence, infinite creativity, vitality. It's life itself pulsing in its greatest strength and wholeness. And by tapping into that, we regenerate all our faculties, and through our faculties, our actions and decision making and enriching different areas of our life. That's why I saw it as so primal.
Right. Well, definitely in a conversation, I would say that the design thinking that we've been doing, let's say here in the program of the Design Science Studio, and one of the things that we've been focused on is this anticipatory design thinking and approach. And to me, that often means being present and being able to, if not fully access, attempt to access this inner seeing, to work with these faculties that are not in the West for many years, have not really been valued at the level that we would want them to be. So therefore, we do sometimes lack that language, right? We lack that context to really get there. And it is true that when I think of regenerative agriculture, or even we've been using a term like a regenaissance,
Yes,
level, it does feel incredibly restorative, really exciting, and also somehow really natural.
I think you're really onto something with this whole program. The more I get to know about it through you, Mariette, because in the many years and decades now of studying the Vedas, there's this point at which you can't resist but include geometry, and where imagery has to present. And so, one of the terms we're all familiar with at this point is mandala, or a circle. It'd be so interesting to explore that and kind of break that down in the whole context of those of you who are exploring this whole field of creative concept, anticipatory. I know I wrote a note. I was looking at Buckminster Fuller's talk with Maharishi, and Buckminster Fuller referred to the great intellect of the universe itself. And that great intellect of the universe is the same intellect that's within our individual consciousness. And it seems that the undertaking of your program is to really start to function within that great intellect and start to image and tease out the concepts of what we need as humans, anticipate what we need, the type of vision that's really going to nourish and support humanity in these complicated times?
Times are complicated, and it's true that a lot of people are having a really tough time. What I really enjoy about Bucky's story, and yes, I do call him Bucky from time to time, I can't help it, uh, is that he really was down. He really had changed his life at a point where he decided to not commit suicide. That's very much in the dialogue that he has publicly, and had at that time publicly, I should say, that he decided that he needed to live. And I'll just quote this because I think that this comes from the clips that we'll share in the links, and says, I had decided that warrant of my not committing suicide was turning my experience to the advantage of many. And then upon meeting Maharishi, he said, so that I feel that Maharishi and I have come together, both of us exploring for what it is we're endowed with, but both inspired by how we could turn the advantage towards the many. So this idea of taking our gifts and turning them towards the many, I feel like that's really been something that you've been working on, and that you're teaching in your writing courses now as well. And I just wonder if there's anything about that that you think brings us into a different state, and what that state feels like.
Sure, I appreciate you bringing this up. First, I think I could tell you a little bit of an embarrassing story, a humbling story. Um, the early years with Maharishi, I was, a teenager, and from different times, there'd be an opportunity to ask him personal questions like, what should I do with my boyfriend? Or, like things that are so meaningless. And one time I was trying to make a decision about one thing or another. And so I asked Maharishi, and he, he was a very patient, loving person. And he said, I appreciate you asking me about a personal matter, but to tell you about myself, my whole mind and thinking, first and foremost, I'm always thinking about world consciousness. What do we need to do for our world family? And all the individual points here and there aren't necessarily what my focus is. And in that moment, it was very instructive for me to culture the community of world family, that's one of our purposes as human beings. And Buckminster Fuller brought that out many times, of thinking about our whole. And in that way, that's a spiritual pursuit of our whole world family. So any time over my life, it was always, what can we do for our world family? And whether it's helping in agriculture, or teaching many people meditation, or training teachers of meditation, or working in education, it's always, Maharishi really cultured and encouraged those of us who would listen to always hold in our hearts what's good for our world family.
World family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really big one. And I do appreciate that, because that really is this regenerative idea, right, taken to its logical expression.
Mm-hmm.
And now I want to turn us back just a little bit, because I wonder if we can maybe show this clip. And I think that if we do show the clip, it'll give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Vedas and
Sure.
Sanskrit, and this little gem that you had shared with me the other day. So I'm just going to bring that up here on my side, and let's see. Oops, a little too soon. Let's see if we can screen share. And I'm going to make sure I set my fancy screen sharing. Let's see if we can, yes. Learning these things. Okay. Okay, just a moment, friends. We may or may not get to cut that piece out. Okay, here we go. So this is actually from a 1971, not necessarily one of the symposium that you had attended, but this is one of their meetings, and we can watch this fresh together. It's about 46 seconds here.
Spoke last night, which structured infinity from the finite values, that is intellectual delineation of the infinite value of life. Both these things, knowledge and experience, makes life fuller. Another word for it, integrated. So here we find in one person the expression of what actually the name means, fuller, integration. You are great. What you spoke last night.
Okay, so there we go. That's it starts to play over again. But I love that and wanted to share that with everybody, this idea of fuller and it being expressed in his very name.
Yes. Oftentimes, Maharishi had a very playful nature. And one thing that was so infectious with Maharishi was his joy of life. He just felt like that was the purpose and permeated all of life, was joy of life. So he could be so playful, and he liked to play with people's names. So I know later in that talk, he says how it's a vision of a fuller life, and how he really appreciated how Buckminster Fuller was open for the good of all of human life. This was Maharishi's mission, and this was Buckminster Fuller's mission. But it reminded me of one of Maharishi's very favorite quotes from the Upanishads. And that's what I shared with you yesterday. I can share it again. I did also want to make a brief comment of how Maharishi talked about knowledge and experience. For those of you who have a familiarity either with the Yoga Sutras or with the Bhagavad Gita, there's this combination of Sankhya and Yoga, where the person aspiring towards integration or enlightenment in life, it comes in these steps of knowledge, our own personal experience, and then understanding. And that's usually learning from a knowledgeable source. And now, so you have your experience in your practice, and then you have your understanding of what that experience is. And so Maharishi sees that, or saw that, as integration in life, and he sees that in Buckminster Fuller's name of Fuller. But the quote that became definitely one of Maharishi's all-time favorites from one of the Upanishads, I'll first read it in Sanskrit, and then I'll read the English translation, is Pranamada Pranamidam, Pranat Pranam Udachate, Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate. This is full, that is full. From fullness, fullness comes out. Taking fullness from fullness, what remains is fullness. And what that refers to is the fullness of our inner faculties, our inner consciousness, that ocean of intelligence and creativity. And that fullness we express, and whatever is expressed is filled with that fullness. And yet we still have our fullness within ourselves. And all of manifest creation is filled with that fullness, and yet that fullness is never less. So there's the underlying truth that everything is this ocean of oneness and consciousness that's inseparable. That's what Buckminster Fuller was able to tap into and live and see for the benefit of humanity, which is a part of that fullness, if that makes sense.
Mind-blowing sense, but yes. we can meditate into that for a little while for sure. You know, we're gonna have to wrap soon, and I know that my intention is to bring you back again and again in this series. But I do want to switch it up a little bit and talk about something that you had shared a long time ago when I first saw you speak once at a conference. And there is this fullness that we can express artistically no matter what we do, right? And this thing I'm recalling is that you were talking about when you grew up, that your family, and they farmed, so to speak, right?
Yes.
They had orchards and
Right.
I mean everything, right? And they would sing often
Yes.
when they were working, and we love music here in Regenera.
Uh-huh.
And I think also that you said then when you started Amba,
Mm-hmm.
you would have a time of the day perhaps where you would do mantra out amongst the fields, and I just wonder if you could share a little snippet of that.
I'd be happy to. When you practice with Vedic organic agriculture, part of the practice is every day there are particular sutras, and they're called richas in Sanskrit, that you play to your growing fields, that whose reverberations resonate with the stages of plant growth, 8 stages of plant growth, and you have all these different reverberations. And so every day I would play different recitations for hours to the different fields on the farm that would support the maximum growth and help develop all the vital fluids and structure that plants should be able to grow. But I also learned that there's this one verse that's from the Upanishads that's a favorite verse, that if I sang it really kind of low and steady when I was working like in a squash field or a field where there'd be a lot of bees and all sorts of different insects, and I didn't want to be stung, but there would be, you want them pollinating away. So I'll read the English of the verse, and then I'll read the Sanskrit of the verse, and I'll also show you. This is the Devanagari script that you would typically see for. That's how the Sanskrit's written, and that's how the Vedas are written. But this verse you use all the time, like before you would teach a lesson, you would use this verse. Before you have a meal. Let us be together, let us eat together, let us be vital together. Let us be radiating truth, radiating the light of life. Never shall we denounce anyone, never entertain negativity. It's all blessing. So this is what I would just say over and over again. I was never stung. And we just all worked together, busily taking care of things, but I was never stung. Sahanao avatu, sahanao bunaktu, saha viryam karavavahai, Tejasvinav Adhitam Astu Ma Vidvashavahai. Sahanao Avatu, Sahanao Bunaktu, Saha Viryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinav Adhitam Astu, Ma Vidvashavahai. Over and over.
And never stung.
Never sung.
Experience and knowledge.
There you go.
Well, there you go.
Well, I just wish every one of you so well. It's such important work that you're doing. And we don't live in a linear world. And so you're teaching us that it's a multiverse, a universe and a multiverse.
Well, I do hope that you will come back and we can talk more about the intricacies of the multiverse. And I wish you well in everything you're doing. And you're very welcome. And for everybody who is in the Asheville, North Carolina area, Liz is there and she is starting to teach.
Yes.
And she has a course that is, a sample of it is being premiered on May 4th at the TM Center there in Asheville. So I'm going to put the contact information in the chat and you'll be able to contact Liz directly or reach out to the TM Center there. And what is the course again, Liz?
It's on the Introduction to Yogic Journaling, combining knowledge and experience, of course, writing from within. Right. It's 8 lessons and you'll learn many life skills as especially in communication and many writing skills. We work with some very beautiful writers. I expect it to be a big plus for anyone who takes it.
There you have it, folks. Oh, yogic writing, yogic journaling. I highly recommend it. So Liz, again, thank you very, very much. And we'll see you soon. And everybody in Regen-era, hope that this was a fun conversation for you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mariette.
My pleasure. Thank you.